What did the Indians do with captive white European women in the era of the Wild West? Since the 17th century, Native Americans have waged long Indian wars against white settlers in order to expel outsiders from their lands. A long series of military conflict, the life of a prisoner in captivity among the Indians was full of dangers and hardships, and for men, such captivity was more likely to be more painful and scary. It was very rare for the Indians to take adult men captive, because the Indians treated every white man as an invader who needed to be destroyed. Therefore, white men tried to finish off immediately or to torture and scalp. Yes, it was not the white Europeans who taught the Indians to scalp as well as engage in cannibalism. Scalping existed among both South American and North American Indians long before the arrival of a white man on their lands. Basically, the Indians captured high-ranking officers or soldiers who could be exchanged for their prisoners, or for profitable food products and even weapons. It was also not uncommon for Indians to capture underage boys from 8 to 14 years old, who could be used for hard work in the tribe, since the Indians needed additional labor instead of missing and dead husbands, whom the Europeans took away from them. Young slaves built and repaired houses, fished and hunted, smoked and canned food. In 1810, the Indians exchanged a male slave for 10 blankets or a rifle with several cartridges. Women cost 2 times more expensive, which often made it difficult for European relatives. However, quite differently, many Indians in captivity treated white European women. The genre of American literature, popular from the 17th to the 19th centuries, was the story of the Indian captivity. These real stories told about a woman who was abducted and held captive by indigenous people. Although Canadian Indians raided New England in search of prisoners for ransom, most of the Indians of the woodlands, forest lands captured English women to replace the dead members of their families lost due to disease or war. The same was done with very young children captured after raids. They were usually adopted as a replacement for deceased relatives, and after that they were treated as real sons or daughters. Among the most formidable nurtured white Indians were Clinton and Jeff Smith, Herman Lehman, Adolph Korn, Rudolph Fisher, and Kiowa Dutch. After being captured, many white women, contrary to the fears of most of the captives, the Indians of the eastern forests showed sincere respect for their captives. They tried to assimilate women, forcing them to learn the language, dressing them up in traditional Indian clothes, moccasins, feathers, and jewelry. And soon white women could be accepted into Indian society and even adopted. The Indians of the Great Plains, the Great Basin, and the Southwest did the same. In these tribes, captive European women were initially subjected to severe apprenticeship, but then assimilated and became part of the tribe. And contrary to the gloomy expectations of most women, sexual relations between them and men, as a rule, did not begin until the prisoner and the captive were united by marriage. Of course, very often a captive woman was married to a young Indian against her will. But one way or another, she was treated humanely. But of course, not all Indian tribes were so kind to pale-faced women, captive white women. In Canada and Texas, as well as most of the territory west of the Mississippi River, were usually forced to serve their captors as concubines and sex slaves. These slaves had to satisfy the warriors, give birth to their children, carry water, chop firewood, sew clothes, and weave baskets. In more militant tribes towards whites, for example, in the Iroquois tribes, many captive women were held captive until they gave birth to a child, to each young man who lost his father or brother, and after that, the woman was starved or killed, but one way or another. For the most part, she never integrated into Indian society, however. Sometimes, of course, there were exceptions, but it seems that the Comanche tribe was the worst of all to white Europeans and Europeans. After the Fort Parker massacre, when white men and women were either killed or tortured to death, one woman was raped when she tried to escape from the Comanches. She miraculously survived, despite the fact that her breasts were cut off and left to die. 3 other women, along with several children, were captured and taken to the camp. where they were stripped, tied up in extremely uncomfortable ways, and beaten with batons too. Of the 3 women were repeatedly raped by Comanches in front of their children. But sometimes some women, even though they obeyed their captors, were treated with unexpected respect. Rachel Plummer's experience vividly illustrates the horrors of female captivity among the Comanches. But thanks to her bravery and spirit, the Comanche tribe began to consider her equal and soon did not use violence against her. When the Comanche and Kiowa tribes were expelled to the reservations north of the Red River, scientists estimate that 30% of the Apache, Comanche, and Kiowa had European blood in their veins. This only confirms the fact that a huge number of white women were abducted by these tribes only for sexual slavery and to replenish their dead children.